I am Julian, 29 years old. After nearly a decade of saving every single dime I had, sacrificing my youth and my sanity to launch my dream company, I invited my entire family to the grand opening. But as I stood completely alone in my brand new office, staring at untouched plates of expensive catered food, they were all across town celebrating my brother's housewarming party. My mother even texted me that very night, not to apologize, not to check on me, but to demand a cut of my non-existent profits for my golden boy brother. But there is one thing they did not know. I had already secured my entire business structure behind an impenetrable corporate shield with my lawyer. And right now, they are facing the total collapse of their finances, practically begging for the very help they once felt entitled to. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their manipulation piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe in justice and earning your own way in this world. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let us go back to the night my illusion of family shattered forever. I was 29 years old the night I sat completely alone in my brand new office. I was sweeping confetti off the floor that nobody had even walked on. The entire place still smelled heavily of fresh paint and new carpet, a scent that I had associated with success and freedom for years. I had spent months obsessing over every single detail of this space. I personally picked out the frosted glass for the glass-paneled conference room. I saved up for months just to buy the high-end espresso machine sitting in the break room kitchen, imagining my team gathering around it on Monday mornings. This was supposed to be the biggest night of my life, the grand opening of my company, something I had been working toward for nearly a decade. And yet, every single ergonomic chair sat empty. The food I had catered was untouched. I had spent half my remaining monthly salary on miniature crab cakes, artisan bruschetta, and a massive charcuterie board, wanting everything to be perfect for my parents. I ate one lonely plate just so it would not go to waste, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. My name is Julian, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the responsible one in my family. I was the one who kept the peace, who showed up for every single birthday, who lent money even when it meant I would be eating cheap ramen noodles for a month. At 6 o'clock that evening, I stood by the glass entrance in my one good navy blue suit, adjusting my tie, nervously waiting for the first familiar face to walk in. I had sent out digital invites weeks in advance, and I even printed physical, heavy cardstock ones for my parents because I knew they would use the excuse that they never saw the email. I arranged for champagne, soft jazz music playing over the speakers, and I had even written a little speech to thank everyone who supported me. At 6:15, I told myself they were just hitting downtown traffic. By 7 o'clock, I was pacing the lobby, refreshing my phone over and over. There were no calls. There were no texts. There were no messages saying, "We are on our way, hold on." At 8 o'clock, the silence in the room was deafening. I walked over to the catering staff, apologized profusely, and quietly told them they could pack up the leftovers. I did not cry. I just sat at one of the sleek modern desks, sipping warm champagne from a cheap plastic flute, staring blankly at the empty lobby. The room echoed with every single sound, amplifying my isolation. All I could think was that after everything I had done for them, after every sacrifice, they could not even bother to show up for one night. Then, my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a photo popping up in the family group chat. My brother Tristan and my parents were standing in a sprawling backyard in front of a brand new, stainless steel barbecue grill. They were laughing, holding up craft beers and margaritas. The caption from my mother read, "Housewarming success." I stared at that glowing screen for what felt like hours. There was no "sorry we couldn't make it." There was no "congratulations on the launch, Julian." Nothing. It was just a casual broadcast to the extended family that they had all consciously chosen Tristan's housewarming over my grand opening without a second thought. My stomach twisted violently. I felt sick, but a dark, cynical part of me was not even surprised. I did not reply to the group chat. I could not bring myself to type a single word. I cleaned up the last of the silver and gold decorations, turned off the overhead lights, locked the deadbolt, and went home to my cramped apartment. The absolute audacity came the very next morning. I woke up, eyes burning from lack of sleep, to a text message from my mother. It read, "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." I just sat there on the edge of my mattress, staring at the screen while my morning coffee went completely cold on the nightstand. My brother deserved a cut of what exactly? He had not invested a single cent into my business plan. He had not lifted a finger to help me move furniture or paint the walls. He had not even shown up to the launch party. My company had not even made a single dollar of profit yet. But suddenly, the golden boy was entitled to a piece of my hard work. I didn't answer right away. I felt this massive wave of bone-deep exhaustion hit me. It was not just from the humiliating night before, but from years and years of being taken for granted. I could already picture exactly how the conversation would go if I called her back. My mother would insist that family always comes first. My father would chime in, saying that Tristan needs this financial boost more than I do. And Tristan would probably send me a bulleted list of reasons why his inspiration justified a percentage of my company. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something inside of me harden. That text message wasn't just an innocent request. It was a warning shot, signaling that my family viewed my business as their personal bank account. I had a choice. I could roll over like I always did, keeping the peace and swallowing my pride, or I could do something entirely different this time. I put my phone face down on the counter, poured myself another cup of black coffee, and started thinking. And that is when I realized, maybe for the very first time in my 29 years of life, that I was not as powerless as they thought I was. I was the one with the company. I was the one with the drive. I was the one with the money. To fully grasp the sheer insanity of my mother's text message, you have to understand the toxic dynamic that defined my entire existence. Tristan was, and always will be, the golden boy. Anything he did, no matter how reckless, foolish, or financially devastating, was somehow framed by my parents as ambitious, charismatic, or just Tristan being Tristan. When he dropped out of his expensive private college after just 2 semesters to find himself, my parents proudly announced at the neighborhood Thanksgiving dinner that he was highly entrepreneurial. When he burned through 3 different corporate jobs in a single year because he refused to show up on time, my mother defended him, saying he just hadn't found his true passion yet. Meanwhile, I existed in the shadows. I quietly put myself through a state school, racking up student loans because the college fund had somehow evaporated to cover Tristan's backpacking trip across Europe. I worked brutal double shifts at a logistics warehouse, sweating through my shirts just to make rent. I lived in a dingy studio apartment above a noisy laundromat that barely fit a twin bed and a second-hand desk. Every single dollar I saved went toward my dream. I wasn't building a side hustle or a passion project. I was building a real, legally registered company with actual employees and commercial office space. The defining moment of their financial abuse, the incident that truly broke my trust, happened 3 years ago. Tristan decided he needed to project extreme wealth to attract investors for his latest imaginary real estate venture. He decided he needed a Porsche. He begged and pleaded, and when the dealership laughed at his credit score, my father practically ordered me to co-sign the auto loan. My father cornered me at a family dinner, using his booming, authoritative voice, telling me that family helps family, and that my salary was robust enough to handle the risk. Against every alarm bell ringing in my head, I signed the paperwork. Within 6 months, Tristan missed 3 consecutive payments. He didn't even warn me. I found out when a collections agent called my phone while I was at work. Tristan's negligence tanked my credit score and nearly cost me my apartment lease during a background check. I had to drain my emergency savings, money I was saving for my business, just to catch up on his arrears and avoid a lawsuit from the bank. When I confronted my parents about it, my father just brushed it off. He told me I was being overly dramatic and that Tristan was just experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. That was the day the invisible wall went up. I stopped telling them anything about my finances, my promotions, or my savings. Let us fast forward back to the timeline of my ruined grand opening. I ignored my mother's text about the profits. I didn't reply that day or the next. Instead, I just watched the family group chat light up with dozens of photos of Tristan's housewarming party, sharing inside jokes that I was deliberately excluded from. Each photo just added fuel to the quiet, raging fire building in my chest. By the end of the week, my mother sent another demanding message. "Julian, answer your phone. This is important." I finally picked up. My mother launched right into her usual routine. There was no, "Hello? No, how are you?" Just a clipped, aggressive tone. "Julian, we've been trying to reach you for days," she said. I stayed completely quiet for a beat longer than usual, just enough to make her uncomfortable. "You're asking me about profits?" I said slowly, choosing every single word carefully. "But not one of you showed up to my company's launch." There was a long pause on the line. I could picture her standing in her pristine suburban kitchen, hand on her hip, already annoyed that I dared to challenge her narrative. "Julian," she finally sighed, using that patient but incredibly condescending tone she used when I was a child. "You know how important Tristan's housewarming was. Everyone was there. It wouldn't have been right to split up the family over one night." "One night?" I repeated, my voice coming out flatter than I expected. "This wasn't a casual dinner party. This was my business launch. Something I have worked toward for years." She scoffed, acting like I was the one being dramatic. "You're overreacting. Tristan is just starting his life. You'll have plenty of other events. Now, about the profits." I actually let out a sharp, humorless laugh at that. "Profits? Mom, I haven't even finished onboarding my first clients yet. There are no profits." She ignored my logic entirely. "Well, Tristan was saying that since he inspired you to start the company, he should get some sort of founder's share, or at least a massive family discount since he wants to use your services for his own projects." That stopped me cold. Inspired me? Tristan didn't even know what industry I was in until last month. I told her I had to go and hung up the phone before she could say another manipulative word. But the boundaries I tried to set were completely ignored. Tristan texted me directly the next afternoon. "Hey bro, I was thinking, can you hook me up with a partnership package? Like, I'll promote your company to my friends, and in return you give me a lifetime free account. Fair?" I stared at the message, absolutely baffled. He had never promoted anything in his life except his own ego. I didn't respond. A day later, my mother called again, asking why I was ignoring my brother when he was trying to help me grow my business. The situation rapidly escalated from emotional manipulation to a terrifying invasion of privacy. A few weeks later, I got an urgent email from Greg, my lead accountant. He informed me that someone using an email address practically identical to my mother's had reached out to his department. They had formally inquired about adding a family partner to my company's primary banking account. My blood ran freezing cold. They did not have the security clearance to do it, of course, but the sheer fact that my mother tried to bypass me and manipulate my accountant made my stomach drop into my shoes. I called her immediately. "Oh, that," she said, sounding utterly annoyed that I caught her. "I was just trying to make things easier for you. This way, Tristan could handle some of the finances and take the stress off your plate." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. "Do not ever do that again," I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. "You don't touch my accounts. You don't ask about my accounts. This company is mine." She huffed and called me territorial, but I didn't believe her innocent act anymore. Then the true violation happened. Early on a Saturday morning, a notification popped up from my company's internal security dashboard. It was a flagged access attempt. Someone was trying to log into the main financial portal from an unknown device. I opened my laptop and checked the security logs. There were 3 failed login attempts from an IP address that was located exactly in my parents' neighborhood. They were actively guessing my administrative passwords. I called my mother. "Oh good, you're awake," she said cheerfully. "We were just talking about how to get you some help. Tristan and I were thinking you're working too hard, and if we had access to some of the systems, we could process payments for you." "You tried to log in," I said flatly. Silence on the other end. "You tried to break into my company account?" My voice rose. She got instantly defensive. Well, yes, but only because you've been so secretive lately. We thought maybe you were overwhelmed. You had no right. I snapped. None. You don't touch my company. She sniffed, her voice taking on that sharp, guilt-tripping edge. You're being ungrateful. Your father and I raised you, and this is the thanks we get. Locking us out. This family shares everything. You're hoarding your success. It's selfish. I hung up the phone. I realized then that they genuinely believed they were entitled to every single thing I had built. The storm fully breached the walls of my life the following Monday. I arrived at my office early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle a mountain of client proposals. As I walked down the quiet hallway, I noticed a thick, cream-colored envelope shoved aggressively under my office door. I picked it up. It was heavy, sealed with tape, and had my name written on it in my father's unmistakable, aggressive handwriting. I sat at my desk, grabbed a letter opener, and sliced it open. Inside was a handwritten letter from my father. The ink was pressed so deeply into the paper you could feel the indentations on the back. I read the words, and my vision actually blurred with rage. Julian, the letter began. We have been patient with you, but your attitude lately is completely unacceptable. Your mother and I have talked, and we think it is time you start giving back to the family in a real way. We formally propose a family stipend. 15% of your monthly revenue to be distributed fairly between your parents and your brother. Consider this a way of honoring where you came from. I sat there in my ergonomic office chair, gripping the letter until the thick paper crinkled loudly in my fists. My father, the man who had blatantly refused to attend the most important night of my career, the man who forced me to co-sign a loan for a Porsche that ruined my credit, was now formally requesting a massive cut of my revenue. Not profits. Revenue. He wanted his 15% cut before I paid my rent, before I paid my employees their salaries, before I even paid my taxes. It was so incredibly absurd, so deeply entitled, that I almost laughed out loud. But the laugh caught painfully in my throat because I knew they were dead serious. It was financial extortion wrapped in a neat little package of family duty. I did not call him back. Instead, I carefully flattened the letter, walked over to the scanner, and created a high-resolution digital copy for my legal files. But the betrayals were not just coming from outside my office walls. My parents were manipulating their way into my inner circle. Later that week, I noticed a strange discrepancy in the internal calendar software. Highly sensitive meeting schedules, vendor payment dates, and even rough outlines of client contracts were being viewed by a user account that had absolutely no business looking at them. I immediately hired a private cybersecurity contractor named Silas to run a full, quiet audit of our internal network. What Silas found over the weekend made my blood run entirely cold. My administrative assistant, Fiona, had been deliberately accessing my private financial files. When I pulled her into the frosted glass-paneled conference room on a Tuesday morning and silently presented the access logs, she completely broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed. She admitted that my mother, Beatrice, had been showing up at the lobby during my lunch hours. My mother had been taking Fiona out for expensive sushi lunches, buying her designer coffee gift cards, and acting like a sweet, concerned parent. In exchange, Fiona was casually passing along updates about my cash flow, my client list, and my stress levels. My own mother was running corporate espionage on me using a 23-year-old assistant. I did not yell. I did not scream. I felt a cold, hard detachment wash over me. I slid a standard severance and non-disclosure agreement across the polished table. I told Fiona to pack her desk and leave the building within 10 minutes, or I would involve the authorities for corporate theft. Watching her walk out the door holding a cardboard box, I realized the horrifying extent of my family's obsession with my money. They were treating me like a hostile corporate takeover target. If Fiona's betrayal was a quiet knife in the back, what happened next was a sledgehammer to the front door. The very next weekend, I was out grabbing lunch with a friend a few blocks away from the office. We were in the middle of a conversation when I got a blaring emergency notification on my phone. My company's physical office alarm had been triggered. My stomach lurched. I practically threw cash on the table and sprinted down the street, rushing back to the commercial building. When I rounded the corner in the hallway, panting and sweating, I found my brother Tristan standing right outside my office door, frantically fiddling with the digital keypad. He was not alone. His shady business partner, Nolan, was standing next to him, holding a heavy-duty metal pry bar wrapped in a towel. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing loudly in the empty, sterile hallway. Tristan physically jumped, dropping his hands from the keypad. He looked genuinely guilty for a split second before plastering on his usual arrogant, punchable grin. "Relax, man," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Mom said you wouldn't mind if I grabbed a few things. I told Nolan here I'd show him around your fancy new office." I stepped right up to him, my chest almost touching his. "You tried to break in?" I said, my voice dropping to a freezing cold register. Tristan rolled his eyes and scoffed, leaning back against the wall. "It's not breaking in if it's family, Julian," he said with a casual shrug, as if prying open a commercial door was the most reasonable thing in the world. I just stared at him for a second. I didn't even know what to say to that level of delusion. "You need to leave," I finally said, measuring each word carefully. Tristan scoffed loudly. "Wow, really? You think you're too good for us now?" I stepped even closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "If you ever try to get into this office again without my explicit permission, I will call the police and press felony charges." His grin finally faltered. He looked into my eyes and saw that the old, pushover Julian was completely gone. "You wouldn't try me," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He and Nolan quickly turned and practically ran down the hallway, muttering under their breath. When the heavy fire door shut behind them, I unlocked my office, walked inside, and locked the deadbolt. I just stood there in the center of the room, my hands trembling violently. That was it. That was the final line. They had crossed from disrespect into outright criminal violation. I knew right then that setting boundaries was no longer going to work. Boundaries are for people who possess a basic level of human respect. For people like my family, you do not build boundaries. You build a fortress and you prepare for war. The Monday after catching Tristan and Nolan outside my office, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a freight train. My body wasn't physically sore, but my chest, my stomach, and my head felt incredibly heavy. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my phone as it buzzed over and over with calls from my mother, my father, and Tristan. Each voicemail got angrier by the hour, accusing me of threatening my own flesh and blood with the police. My mother's voice snapped on the latest recording, demanding I apologize before the family fell apart completely. I deleted the voicemails without finishing them. For years, I had been trained since childhood to put their feelings first, to be the ultimate peacekeeper. But keeping the peace was eating me alive, draining the life out of me. I called in sick to my own company that day, sitting on my couch with my laptop, not working, just staring. I opened the family group chat and scrolled all the way back, rereading months of messages. I saw every sarcastic joke at my expense. Every time Tristan was praised for doing the bare minimum. Every time my parents brushed off my massive achievements like they were nothing. And as I read, the deep ache in my chest crystallized into cold, hard clarity. I had bent over backwards to earn their approval, and it was never going to be enough. I wasn't going to try anymore. The next morning, I initiated a complete and total lockdown of my entire existence. I called Samuel, my closest friend from college and one of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in the city. We sat in my office for 6 straight hours, drinking black coffee and drawing up a battle plan. I instructed Samuel to restructure my entire business ecosystem. We established a blind holding company incorporated in a different state, one with strict corporate privacy laws. We meticulously transferred all of my intellectual property, my operational assets, my client contracts, and my financial accounts into it. Legally speaking, the company my family thought I owned became a subsidiary completely controlled by an entity that my parents could not even look up in a public registry, let alone touch. I updated my personal will and my 401k beneficiaries, ensuring that if anything catastrophic happened to me, not a single red cent would go to my parents or Tristan. Everything was locked down behind layers of legal steel. Then I went after the personal ties. I spent the entire weekend acting on a meticulously written list. I logged into the joint streaming services, the shared utility bills, and the old family phone plan that I was still paying for, and I canceled every single one. I called my bank and added biometric security measures and two-factor authentication on every platform. I moved my personal savings to a brand new account at a completely different banking institution. I removed my father as the emergency contact on my health insurance. Every single digital, financial, and legal thread connecting me to that toxic bloodline was permanently severed. I did not send a warning text. I did not explain myself. I just pulled the plug and watched the silence settle in. By Sunday night, sitting back in my chair, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Calm. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. While I was silently fortifying my walls, the universe handed me the ultimate weapon of leverage. A few weeks into the lockdown, my company landed a massive pitch meeting with Mr. Harrison, the CEO of a prominent real estate development firm in the city. Winning his contract meant securing my company's financial future and payroll for the next 5 years. The meeting went incredibly well. We shook hands, and as we were wrapping up the details in the boardroom, Mr. Harrison paused, looking down at my last name on the printed proposal. He asked casually if I was related to a Tristan. I kept my face completely neutral, hiding the sudden spike in my heart rate, and nodded carefully. Mr. Harrison chuckled, shaking his head with a look of mild disgust. He mentioned that Tristan was aggressively trying to secure a massive commercial contracting job with his firm for a new strip mall. But according to Mr. Harrison's background check, Tristan had no liquid capital, no experienced crew, and a terrible credit history. Then Mr. Harrison dropped the bombshell. He revealed that Tristan was using my name and my company's reputation to secure the deal. Tristan had explicitly told the real estate development firm that my successful company was his primary financial backer, and that we would guarantee his work. Tristan was essentially trying to secure a multimillion-dollar real estate deal by pledging my corporate assets as collateral without my knowledge. I sat there in the heavy leather chair, looking directly at Mr. Harrison. I did not act shocked. I simply smiled a very calm, very cold smile. I looked Mr. Harrison dead in the eyes and informed him, clearly and on the record, that my company had absolutely zero affiliation with Tristan's ventures. I told him that my brother was lying, that he had a history of financial instability, and that any contract signed with him would end in a catastrophic default. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened immediately. The easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp instincts of a veteran CEO who hates being lied to. He thanked me for the heads-up and made a quick, decisive note on his legal pad. I knew right then and there that Tristan's deal was dead in the water. I had just quietly nuked his entire future, and he didn't even know it yet. A few days later, my phone lit up with a text in the family group chat. It was my mother. She announced, in a tone that brooked no argument, that they were hosting a mandatory family meeting that Sunday afternoon to discuss some exciting opportunities. Tristan chimed in right after, acting smug, saying he couldn't wait to share what he had been working on. My father sent the final text, demanding my attendance, stating it was time to finalize the family stipend. I stared at the messages on my screen. A few months ago, this kind of coordinated pressure would have given me a severe panic attack. I would have felt the crushing, suffocating weight of guilt and obligation that they had instilled in me since childhood. But sitting in my secure office, holding the thick stack of legal documents that proved my total and permanent independence, and knowing that Tristan's entire house of cards was about to violently collapse on his head, I felt nothing but absolute, icy calm. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own life. I typed a single word in reply to the group chat. Yes, I was going to that meeting, but I was not going as the obedient, terrified son they thought they could bully into submission. I was walking into their house as a CEO, and I was going to burn their entitlement to the ground. The drive to my parents' house that Sunday afternoon felt entirely different than any other drive I had ever taken down that incredibly familiar stretch of road. The weather was bright, sunny, and deceptively cheerful, practically mocking the dark, heavy reality of what I was about to do. I drove my car out of the bustling city where I had built my independence and slowly transitioned into their pristine, manicured suburban neighborhood. I passed the familiar, strict homeowners association signs, the perfectly trimmed hedges that lined the sidewalks, and the identical driveways. I remembered spending my high school summers sweating in the grueling, humid heat, pushing a heavy, rusted lawnmower across those exact lawns just to earn a little extra cash for my college fund. I remembered how my hands would blister, how my back would ache, and how I would come home covered in grass clippings and dirt, only to find my older brother Tristan sitting inside on the expensive leather couch. He would be playing video games in the crisp, central air conditioning, casually sipping expensive imported sodas that my mother bought specifically for him. That dynamic had never changed. Not when we were teenagers, and certainly not now that we were grown men facing the real world. I parked my car across the street from the two-story colonial house I grew up in. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a long moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, listening to the faint ticking of the cooling engine block. I did not feel like a nervous, desperate child anymore. I did not feel that familiar, suffocating knot of anxiety in my stomach that usually accompanied a family visit, the anxiety of wondering what I would do wrong, how I would be criticized, or how much money they would subtly ask for. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that cost more than my first car. I carried a sleek, heavy leather briefcase containing every single ironclad legal document my lawyer, Samuel, and I had meticulously drafted over the past few weeks. I walked up the concrete driveway, past my father's meticulously polished luxury sedan, took a deep breath of the suburban air, and firmly rang the doorbell. My mother, Beatrice, opened the front door almost immediately, as if she had been hovering right behind it waiting for her prey to arrive. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot straight up toward her hairline the moment she saw me. She looked me up and down, her eyes darting over the expensive suit, the professional briefcase, and the absolute, freezing cold expression on my face. She was expecting the old Julian. She was expecting the guy who would show up in a casual sweater, shoulders slightly hunched, ready to apologize for whatever perceived slight I had committed by ignoring their calls. Instead, she got the CEO. She offered a tight, forced smile that did not even come close to reaching her eyes. "Well, don't you look formal?" she said, her tone a passive-aggressive mix of fake amusement and cautious wariness. I did not step aside to let her hug me. I did not offer a polite, deferential greeting. I simply looked her dead in the eye, my face a mask of stone, and said evenly, "This is a business meeting." I dressed appropriately. I stepped past her, ignoring her slight gasp of offense, and walked inside the house. The heavy, savory smell of slow-cooked pot roast and freshly baked dinner rolls wafted from the kitchen. It was an obvious, desperate, and highly calculated attempt to make this feel like a cozy, traditional Sunday family dinner. Pot roast was my mother's weapon of choice. It was the meal she always cooked when she was about to deliver bad news, or when she needed a massive favor. They were trying to set a stage of domestic comfort to disarm me, to trigger my deeply ingrained sense of familial obligation before they went in for the financial kill. I bypassed the living room entirely and walked straight into the formal dining room. Tristan was already sitting at the long, dark oak table. He was leaning aggressively back in his chair with a smug, arrogant little grin plastered across his face, looking like a king waiting for his tribute. He wore a cheap, poorly fitted blazer over a graphic t-shirt, trying desperately to look like some sort of laid-back, wealthy Silicon Valley visionary. My father, Victor, sat at the head of the heavy table. He had put on a crisp button-down shirt and a silk tie for the occasion, looking incredibly serious and self-important. He sat with his hands steepled, as if he was presiding over a Fortune 500 corporate boardroom instead of the dining room where we used to eat dry Thanksgiving turkey. And then, sitting in the corner, was the ultimate wild card, Aunt Clara. She was perched quietly on a floral armchair, holding a delicate porcelain cup of tea. Aunt Clara was the extended family member who always played the sweet, innocent, God-fearing peacemaker. She was the woman who brought casseroles to the neighborhood sick and remembered everyone's birthdays. But her presence here today confirmed my absolute worst suspicions. Clara was a financial parasite wrapped in a grandmotherly cardigan. She was the one who constantly whispered toxic advice into my parents' ears, always reminding them of traditional family duties, blood obligations, and how children owed their parents for the mere gift of life. She offered me a sickly sweet, close-lipped smile as I entered the room. I completely ignored her, focusing my attention solely on the men at the table. "Glad you could finally make it, Julian," my father said, using his booming, authoritative voice, the voice he used when he wanted to assert absolute dominance. He gestured to the empty wooden chair directly across from Tristan. "Let's sit down and talk like mature adults." I took my seat slowly, deliberately taking my time. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the hardwood floor right next to my leg, keeping it within arm's reach. I folded my hands on the polished wood of the table and waited. I did not offer any small talk about the local sports team. I did not compliment the smell of the food. I let the heavy, awkward silence stretch out, filling the room until the tension became so incredibly unbearable that they felt physically compelled to break it. Tristan, lacking any actual business acumen, social grace, or basic patience, took the bait immediately. He launched right into his prepared pitch, spreading out a few pieces of poorly printed paper on the table as if he were a seasoned executive leading a massive corporate merger. "So, here's the deal, bro," Tristan said, puffing out his chest and attempting to project an air of complete, undeniable confidence. "I have got a solid, exclusive line on a great commercial real estate project over on the rapidly developing west side of town. It is a massive opportunity, a real generational game changer. The zoning laws are shifting, and the property values are about to skyrocket. But I need some heavy liquid capital to get the foundation going, secure the initial municipal permits, and lock down the contractors. Once this massive project takes off, it is going to generate incredible passive income, and it will benefit the whole family legacy. Since your little company is doing so well lately, Mom and Dad and I figured you could easily front the initial investment. Consider it a family loan with guaranteed returns." He paused, clearly expecting me to be blown away by his clumsy use of business buzzwords. He literally used the phrase synergistic growth twice in the span of 3 minutes. He had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. I simply stared at him, my face completely blank, my breathing steady and slow, offering absolutely zero validation. Tristan cleared his throat, clearly rattled by my total lack of reaction, and continued, his voice pitching up slightly. "It is just a small percentage of your gross revenue each month, Julian. Barely a drop in the bucket for a guy like you. And in exchange, we will consider you an official, silent partner in my venture. You won't even have to do any of the heavy lifting." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, looking around the room at my parents as if he had just delivered the most brilliant, foolproof financial strategy of the decade. My mother nodded enthusiastically, her eyes shining with that fake, performative pride she always reserved exclusively for him. "See, Julian? This is exactly what we meant about working together as a solid family unit. Everyone contributes their fair share of their salary and resources. Everyone wins together." My father leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. He reached down and slid a thick, comb-bound document across the polished wood toward me. "I had a lawyer draft this up last week, Julian. A real professional downtown. It outlines the 15% monthly revenue sharing agreement, as well as a specific clause that grants Tristan limited executive access to your company's vendor network and banking portals, just so he can streamline the real estate transactions. It is entirely fair. It protects the family legacy and ensures we all rise together. We just need your signature right there on the last page, and we can all move forward, put this silly tension behind us, and enjoy your mother's dinner." I looked down at the document sitting in front of me. I didn't even reach out to touch it. I could tell just by glancing at the formatting, the font, and the generic cover page that it was a pathetic boilerplate contract. It looked like it had been printed off a cheap legal template website for $50. They actually believed I was stupid enough or guilt-ridden enough to sign away my life's work without having my own counsel review it. They believed they could treat my hard-earned salary, my commercial leases, and my company's gross revenue as their personal early inheritance, something they could just demand over a Sunday pot roast. The sheer, unadulterated, delusional entitlement radiating in that room was breathtaking. I let them talk for a few more minutes. I sat perfectly still, listening as they outlined how my money would pay for Tristan's luxury lifestyle, how it would fund my parents' early retirement plans, and how signing this document was the ultimate proof of my loyalty and love for the family. They painted a twisted picture where I was the silent workhorse, generating the cash in the dark, while they served as the glamorous board of directors, dictating exactly how my money was spent. When they finally ran out of breath, ran out of buzzwords, and stopped talking, the room fell silent again. They were waiting for me to cave. They were waiting for the old Julian to apologize for being distant, pick up the cheap plastic pen sitting next to the document, and sacrifice his own future to keep the peace. Instead, I reached down to the floor, snapped open the heavy brass latches of my leather briefcase, and pulled out a file of my own. I pulled out a thick, heavy legal folder of my own and slid it directly across the table, physically pushing their pathetic, internet-printed contract out of the way. My folder was stamped with the embossed, gold foil logo of one of the most ruthless, expensive corporate law firms in the state. "What is this?" my father asked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion as he stared at the heavy cardstock. "Documentation," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the suffocating tension in the dining room like a surgical steel blade. "That is my company's newly executed operating agreement. Those are the updated ownership records filed with the State Board of Commerce. And those are the finalized financial restructuring forms. They prove, without a single shadow of a legal doubt, that I am the sole founder, the sole shareholder, and the absolute only decision-maker for my enterprise." I watched my father slowly open the folder. His eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, the notarized stamps, and the ironclad clauses that Samuel had drafted. I could actually see the color drain from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old, as he realized exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at a financial fortress that he could never, ever breach. "And before any of you even think to ask," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly even and utterly devoid of emotion, "no, there will be absolutely no partnership. There will be no revenue sharing. There will be no family stipend. This company is mine, legally, permanently, and exclusively." Tristan frowned, his smug, arrogant facade violently cracking under the weight of my words. He sat up straight. Whoa, what is with all the intense lawyer talk, man? We are family. You do not have to make it so official and hostile. I'm just asking for a little help to get my feet off the ground." "Yes," I said evenly, locking eyes with my brother, refusing to blink, refusing to let him look away. "I do, because the last time we had a casual, unspoken understanding about boundaries, someone in this house tried to illegally access my corporate banking accounts without my permission. Someone tried to physically pry open the doors to my commercial office with a metal crowbar. And someone sent me a threatening, handwritten letter demanding 15% of my gross revenue as if it was their God-given right to my labor." My mother bristled, her face flushing a deep, angry, mottled red. She slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. "That was your father's idea. We were just trying to help you manage things because you seemed so overwhelmed and stressed out. I have it in writing that we had good intentions. We are your parents, Julian. You owe us respect." I interrupted her, my voice firm but deadly quiet. "If anything like that ever happens again, if anyone in this room tries to contact my accountants, my employees, or bypass my security systems, I will not hesitate to involve law enforcement. I will file a lawsuit for corporate espionage and harassment. I will press felony charges, and I will let the state prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law." I will ruin you. The dining room went completely, terrifyingly silent. Aunt Clara stopped sipping her tea, her cup frozen halfway to her mouth. Felt like I was standing in a graveyard. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the entire house was the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock out in the hallway. You wouldn't, my father said finally. His voice was low, laced with a desperate, weak attempt at maintaining his patriarchal threat. I would, I said simply, leaning forward just an inch, making sure he saw the absolute, unyielding certainty in my eyes. I have the high-definition security footage of Tristan and Nolan at my door. I have the IP server logs of the attempted digital hacks tracing back to the router in this exact house. I have the manipulated emails you sent to my accountant. And I have a corporate lawyer who is fully briefed, heavily paid on retainer, and ready to litigate the second I give him the green light. This isn't a threat, Dad. It is a boundary. You do not cross it again. Tristan snorted loudly, trying desperately to play it off, trying to regain some semblance of control in a room where he had just been completely neutered. He stood up, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. You think you are so big now, huh? Just because you are making a little money, you think you can ruin my life? I need this real estate deal, Julian. Mr. Harrison is waiting on my financial backing confirmation on Monday morning. If I don't get this, I'm ruined. I smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It wasn't a gloating, cartoonish villain smile. It was just a deeply calm, profoundly satisfied smile of a man who held all the cards. No, Tristan. I think I finally learned that I do not owe you my success. And I definitely do not owe you access to my hard work. As for Mr. Harrison, that brings me to the second part of this little meeting. Tristan froze in his tracks. The last bits of color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly pale. What are you talking about? I reached into my suit jacket pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and set it flat on the table right in front of me. I tapped the screen, navigated to my recent contacts, and hit dial. I put the phone on speaker, turning the volume all the way up. The loud, electronic dial tone echoed off the dining room walls. After 2 rings, a deep, highly authoritative voice answered. Julian, good afternoon. Harrison here. My family stared at the glowing phone as if it were a live grenade about to detonate in the middle of their pot roast. Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice crisp and intensely professional. I apologize for interrupting your Sunday afternoon, but I am currently sitting here with my brother, Tristan. He was just insisting, quite loudly, that my company is backing his commercial contracting project. I wanted to ensure we were completely clear on our previous conversation regarding this matter. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Harrison spoke again, his voice was laced with pure, unfiltered corporate disdain. We are absolutely clear, Julian. In fact, I had my legal team draft a formal rejection letter on Friday afternoon. Tristan, if you can hear me right now, your attempt to leverage your brother's corporate assets without his explicit, written consent is tantamount to fraud. You lied to my development team about your capital. We have officially terminated all negotiations with you, and you are blacklisted from bidding on any future projects with our firm or any of our subsidiaries. Do not ever contact my office again. The line clicked dead. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Tristan sat heavily back down in his chair, his mouth slightly open. His entire fragile, arrogant illusion of success shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of his parents. My father looked completely shell-shocked, staring blankly at the phone. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling up in her eyes, not out of regret for how they treated me, but out of pure humiliation that their golden boy had been exposed as a fraud. Tristan finally snapped. He jumped back out of his chair, his face contorted with unhinged rage. You just cost me a multi-million-dollar contract. You ruined me, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. No, Tristan, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, refusing to match his chaotic, emotional energy. You cost yourself a contract by lying about my company's involvement. I do not reward dishonesty, and I do not subsidize fraud. Before any of them could launch into another screaming match, before my mother could start crying and begging, I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a thick stack of printed papers and dropped them onto the center of the oak table, right next to the legal folder. These, I said, pointing to the documents, are the official termination notices for every single shared account and bill that still had my name attached to it. The family cell phone plan, the premium internet, the auto insurance policies for your cars, the cloud storage, all canceled or transferred entirely out of my name. Effective immediately. I am no longer funding your lives. My mother's mouth fell completely open. Julian, you can't just do that. How are we supposed to pay for all of this on a fixed income? I can't. I asked coldly, standing up from the table and buttoning my suit jacket. I did. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Tristan's smug, punchable expression was entirely gone now, completely replaced with a deep, humiliating flush of desperate, impotent anger. This is ridiculous. You are acting like some kind of dictator. All we wanted was a little help from our own brother. You wanted control? I said, meeting his panicked, furious eyes without flinching a single millimeter. And you wanted it without doing any of the actual hard work. You wanted to skip the sleepless nights, the stress, the panic attacks, and the sacrifice and just jump straight to the payout. You wanted to treat me like an ATM. That ends today. For the very first time in my entire life, standing in that dining room surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, I did not feel like I was on the defensive. I did not feel the desperate, clawing need to explain myself, to beg for their understanding, or to manage their irrational, toxic emotions. I felt remarkably, undeniably steady. I gathered my empty folders, slipped them back into my leather briefcase, and snapped the brass latches shut. The sharp click echoed loudly in the room, sounding like a judge's gavel. This conversation is over, I said quietly, looking at each of their stunned, defeated faces. If you would like to have a relationship with me in the future, it will be on strictly respectful terms. Otherwise, consider this the absolute last time we will be meeting like this. I turned around and walked out of that house without looking back. I didn't stop when my mother started sobbing my name, her cries echoing off the hardwood floors. I didn't turn around when my father yelled that I was making a massive mistake and tearing the family apart. I just walked out the front door, closing it firmly behind me, and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The walk down the driveway to my car felt like walking on air. The heavy, suffocating chain of obligation that had bound me to their toxic expectations had finally, permanently been snapped. The fallout from that Sunday meeting hit my family like a devastating financial earthquake, and I watched the entire structure collapse from a very safe, legally protected distance. Without my pristine credit score to prop him up, and without the grand illusion of my company's financial backing, Tristan was completely and utterly exposed to the real world. Word spread incredibly fast in the local business and real estate community. Tristan lost 2 more prospective clients within a single month. His reputation was absolutely destroyed. Commercial contractors and suppliers realized he was completely unreliable, that he was a massive liability, and that he routinely promised financial backing he didn't actually have. A few weeks later, I heard through the industry grapevine that he was facing a massive lawsuit from a drywall vendor he had stiffed on a previous job. Because he had burned his bridge with me, he had absolutely no money to hire a defense lawyer. His leased truck was repossessed in the middle of the night. He was forced to move out of his fancy rental house and sleep on my parents' living room couch, exactly where he belonged. My parents, meanwhile, were thrown into a massive, self-inflicted financial crisis. They had grown so incredibly accustomed to using my bank account as their personal safety net that they had no idea how to actually manage their own household budget. without my monthly contributions silently covering their premium insurance policies, their exorbitant unlimited phone bills, and their endless streaming services, their comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle took a massive hit. They had to actually dip into the funds they had saved for their retirement. My phone rang constantly for the first 2 weeks. My mother would leave long, crying voicemails, begging me to reconsider, trying to use extreme guilt to reel me back in. She would say things like, "Julian, please, your brother is struggling so much. He's depressed. How can you abandon your own flesh and blood when you have so much?" My father left angry, threatening messages, telling me I was disowned, that I was a disgrace to the family name, and that I would regret this when they were gone. I listened to none of them. I blocked both of their numbers on my personal and work phones. I did not engage. During this chaotic time, I also learned a horrifying, dark truth about Aunt Clara, the quiet woman sipping tea in the corner of the dining room during my ambush. A few days after the meeting, I received an unexpected phone call from my father's older brother, Uncle Robert. He had heard through the family grapevine about my drastic actions, and instead of scolding me, he called to congratulate me. Uncle Robert revealed the dark, unspoken secret of our family history, a secret my parents had buried for decades. Years ago, Aunt Clara had manipulated her own parents, my grandparents, into giving her complete legal control over the family estate. When my grandfather passed away, the funeral wasn't even over before Clara was executing her plan. She systematically drained her brother's inheritance through hidden fees, caretaking expenses, and forged legal documents, leaving Uncle Robert with absolutely nothing, and she managed to do it all legally, using the exact same guilt-tripping tactics, the exact same speeches about family duty and loyalty that my parents were trying to use on me. Her greed was so toxic that it had even triggered a bitter divorce in the extended family and a horrific custody battle over my cousins, all because of the financial ruin she left in her wake. Aunt Clara was the one who had convinced my mother and father to demand 15% of my revenue. She was the one who recommended the cheap lawyer to draft that bogus contract. She was actively coaching my parents on how to legally siphon my salary and assets without technically breaking the law. She had turned financial abuse into a generational art form, and she was trying to groom my parents to do the exact same thing to me. Discovering that truth completely validated everything I had done. Toxic family dynamics are a disease. They use the biological bond as a weapon to bleed you dry, convincing you that setting yourself on fire is just part of loving them. But I had disarmed them. I had taken away their ammunition. I had broken the generational curse, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to hurt me ever again. 6 months passed. Half a year of pure, uninterrupted, beautiful peace. In the absolute absence of my family's constant manufactured drama, their manipulative phone calls, and their relentless financial drains, my company experienced explosive, unprecedented growth. Without the immense mental weight of carrying their burdens, I was completely focused. I slept through the night. I woke up without that familiar feeling of dread sitting heavy in my chest. I signed 2 major new contracts with nationwide brands, secured a massive promotion of my company's services within the state's industry, and hired a highly competent, incredibly loyal team of 15 employees. We moved out of the original, small office space and took over an entire floor in a beautiful, glass-walled high-rise building downtown. I bought a new car. I paid myself a generous salary. I fully funded my retirement accounts. I was finally living the exact life I had sacrificed my entire youth to build. I wasn't just surviving day to day anymore. I was thriving. I had built a new family out of friends, colleagues, and mentors who actually respected me as a human being, not just a wallet. And then, just as autumn was setting in, came the final family barbecue. It was the first family event I had been invited to in months. My mother bypassed my blocked phone number by calling the main office line and speaking directly to my receptionist, begging her to pass along a message. "Julian." My mother had pleaded when I finally, reluctantly picked up the line, her tone unusually soft, broken, and defeated. "We would really like you to come to the house this Saturday, just for an hour. Things have been incredibly tense since you left. Tristan is really struggling. Your father and I just want to talk. We want to see our son. I debated saying no. I debated just hanging up the phone and going back to my spreadsheets. But something deep inside me knew this was the final moment. This was the absolute closure I needed to put the past to rest permanently. I drove to the house that Saturday afternoon. When I arrived and walked into the backyard, the contrast to Tristan's extravagant housewarming party a year ago was staggering. The atmosphere was incredibly strained, heavy, and awkward. Tristan sat alone at the wooden picnic table, looking sullen, exhausted, and utterly defeated. He was picking aimlessly at his plate of food, wearing a faded t-shirt, looking like a man who had finally met the real world and lost terribly. My father stood by the fence, looking visibly aged, tired, and completely stripped of his usual booming arrogance. My mother stood by the grill, nervously wringing her hands, looking like she had rehearsed a desperate, emotional speech in the mirror for hours. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling slightly as she stepped toward me. "We just want to put all this ugliness behind us. We miss you so much. Family is more important than money." I almost laughed out loud at the sheer, blinding hypocrisy of that statement, but I kept my expression perfectly calm, my hands casually tucked into the pockets of my expensive slacks. "Funny?" I said, my voice carrying clearly over the quiet backyard. "Because money was the absolute only thing you wanted from me for months." My mother flinched backward as if I had physically struck her in the face. "That is not fair, Julian. We were just trying to guide you." "It is completely fair," I said quietly, firmly holding my ground, refusing to let her rewrite history and gaslight me one last time. "You skipped the most important night of my life, the launch of my entire future, to go to a housewarming party. You tried to digitally hack into my corporate bank accounts. You demanded a massive percentage of my gross revenue before I had even broken even. And when I finally stood up for myself and said no, you tried to guilt me into giving you access anyway by using Aunt Clara's toxic playbook." My father sighed heavily, looking down at his worn-out shoes, unable to meet my eyes. "We made mistakes, Julian. We see that now. We pushed too hard. But surely you can find it in your heart to forgive us. We are your parents." "I can," I said, cutting him off completely before he could launch into a monologue about blood and duty. "But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it absolutely does not mean letting you keep taking from me. Forgiveness just means I am no longer carrying the anger around with me every day. But the door is still locked." Tristan finally spoke up, his voice sharp with lingering, pathetic bitterness. "You think you are better than us now, don't you? Just because you have a fancy office and money, you think you can just abandon us." I turned to look at my brother, calmer than I had ever been in my entire life. "No, Tristan, I don't think I'm better than you. I think I have finally stopped letting you use me as your permanent, personal backup plan, and you just don't like the reality of having to save yourself for once." He didn't respond. He just stared at the grass, his jaw clenched tight. I stood there, taking my time, letting the heavy silence stretch across the yard, letting them fully absorb the reality of the situation. "Here is the truth," I said, looking at each of them one last time, making sure they heard every single syllable. "I built my company from absolutely nothing. I sacrificed years of my life for it. And you didn't just fail to support me. You actively, maliciously tried to steal from me. You didn't want a son. You wanted a living, breathing retirement fund. That ends now. We will not be doing business together, ever. We will not be sharing accounts. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it will be as a family member, not as a shareholder. And it will be entirely on my terms." I started walking toward the wooden gate, then paused, turning back one final time. "And if you ever try to cross that line again to get into my accounts, my office, or my business, I will treat you exactly the same way I would treat any other criminal trespasser." Their faces were a mix of total shock, deep regret, and simmering anger, but nobody said a single word to stop me. I walked out the gate and left without another glance. Driving home, I felt something so profoundly solid in my chest. I felt true, unbreakable peace. That night, I sat in my new high-rise office, looking out over the glowing, sprawling city skyline. My team had gone home hours ago. The space was beautifully silent, except for the faint hum of the computer servers in the climate-controlled room down the hall. I thought about all the times I had bent over backwards for my family, all the anxiety, the tears, the empty bank accounts, and I smiled, because now, finally, they understood. The next morning, I woke up to a short email from my mother. It read, "We will respect your wishes. We just hope someday you will come back to the family." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a stunning photo of my new office, the polished floors, the clean modern desks, the name of my company glowing brightly on the wall, the breathtaking view of the sunrise over the city, and I sent it to the family group chat with a single, final message. You had your chance to be part of this. That chance is gone. And then I muted the chat for good. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, closed my laptop, and let out a long, deeply satisfying breath. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like I was standing outside the family looking in, begging for warmth. I felt like I had built a life, a fortress, and a future entirely my own. And this time, no one could take it from me. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this journey, it is that you are never, ever obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep your toxic family members warm. Your hard work, your salary, and your peace of mind belong exclusively to you. A biological connection is not a license for financial abuse. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to cut the cord to save yourself from being dragged down? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.